Well, the emotional blackmail that activists have used has been, this argument that if kids don't get this early intervention, then they're at higher risk of suicide. Well, we have absolutely no idea whether, we don't, suicidal ideation or distress is not easily disentangled from confusion around your identity. It's not clear that it's simply transphobia or being trapped.
No, it's clear that it's clear that it's simply not. It's not simple, first of all, as you just pointed out. It's actually unbelievably complicated. So,
and you
most
can see
difficult things. Yep.
Yeah. Well, there's a paper that's been recently published by Lisa Lippman, who did the original exploratory research on rapid onset gender dysphoria, and she's gone and interviewed 100 detransitioners, which is a lot of people.
I think she just talked to Barry Weiss about that.
Okay, yeah. Well, her paper, she interviewed detransitioners, so people who have transitioned gender and who now regret it. And there's a couple of patterns that stand out. One pattern that stands out is that often people felt the need to transition after some trauma had happened to them, so they experienced the trauma. And then another pattern that stands out is that these individuals were sort of sold gender transition as a solution to all of their problems.
I think I read the paper. I think that one of the most common claims of the detransitioners was that they were tremendously ill-informed about the full consequences of their actions by the relevant medical professionals.
Yeah.
And then we could also say it's certainly possible that the relevant medical professionals are too terrified to fully inform them.
Well, it's their job. I mean,
I know. I'm not. It's not an excuse, but it is. But it's still worth noting, because you could understand. Look, I know what happened in Toronto to the world's lead researcher on transsexual transition in children. I mean, his life was torn into shreds, and he's an apolitical guy. He's just a researcher, and he's a good one as well.
Yeah.
And so this fear, you can say, well, you're a professional. It's your duty to stand up regardless of the fear. But when there's that much pressure, even people who stand up are going to be inclined to speak a lot less than they might otherwise.
Yeah. I've had a press council complaint made against me for an article I wrote for The Australian on transgender issues, and it wasn't upheld. But anytime a journalist in Australia wants to write about issues particularly to do with medical intervention and gender dysphoric kids, they are subject to complaints, press council complaints.
Well, and if you're an MD or a psychologist, if someone takes a complaint against you to your college, especially if that college has been increasingly dominated by activists, you are so screwed.
Yeah.
Like I had one client just cause me just an unbelievable amount of misery.
Really?
And because you can hijack the whole bureaucracy as a weapon.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah, and that's what these activists do, and they're very good at it, and they only need to have a couple of successes under their belt, and they have a whole system for attacking people.
Well, we have the human rights commissions in Canada, which are a quasi-judicial entity with increasing power, and that's a perfect weapon for any activist who's motivated to use it. And that whoever the target of the Human Rights Commission is, you can kiss 5 years of their life goodbye, and there's a high probability that they're going to be found guilty regardless of what they did. It's really, it's truly appalling, especially given that it's happening under the aegis, hypothetically, of human rights.
And the ability to give informed consent. And this is just this is an example of how fanatics hijack institutions which you would have previously thought were fairly centrist and moderate. So it's, the transgender activism issue is a perfect example, because it's a tiny, transgender activists are a minority of transgender people who are a tiny minority anyway. So it's just like the smallest number of people creating an extreme amount of havoc. And it's a perfect example of how a tiny intolerant minority can basically dominate others using all of the new tools that we have today: social media, bureaucratic complaints, mobbing, that type of thing.